stage. Now, I took you on a very long journey of worldview for a very specific reason. There's a study that was done a few years ago, and what they found in that study is that if you hold the values of the worldviews we just talked about, you are less happy in life than your conservative counterparts. And if you hold these views that we just talked about, you are, what's the word I'm looking for? You are more, you actually don't like people. You are prejudiced towards people who don't hold these values. So part of the study dealt with professors in a university, and if you held these values, and you saw somebody that you thought was a conservative and their name was on a grant requesting money, now I'm going to deny it because they don't hold the values that I hold. And as they did this study, they just found that the happiness levels were lower, which really brings us to where we want to be tonight on our topic of Gen Z. A couple of months ago, I had the privilege to have a conversation with a guy named James Chong. James is the Vice President of Innovation for InterVarsity, which is like a campus missions ministry here in America. And he took the idea of generations that we talked about tonight, and he looked at millennials. And he found that the driving question for millennials was the question, what is beautiful? What is beautiful? What makes life beautiful? What brings meaning to it? And so this is maybe where we see millennials are like, why do they want work-life balance? What's up with that? Why can't they just go to a job? Why do they want to work from home? What's all this remote stuff? Why are they just hopping from job to job? I'm practicing my cantankerous old man as well.
I like it. I like it.
I want to get a leg
good way
up.
to come down. We're landing.
Yeah, we're landing. So James asked that question of millennials. And so as I've worked on this stuff, I've come to the point that the question for Generation Z is, am I safe? And I think that is the driving question for Generation Z. So when we look at worldview, if they're holding a worldview that has these values, their happiness isn't safe. We look at, another major factor with Gen Z is that they struggle with what are called snowplow parents or helicopter parents. Helicopter parents began with millennials. Snowplow just got bigger and better as we rolled into Gen Z.
Sounds about right.
And so what we find is that Gen Z who grow up with parents who do everything for them, maybe out of love and kindness, things like that. Like, I'm trying to do this to help my child. They're actually handicapping their child, much like the analogy of a butterfly.
Yes.
Larva is, trying to get out of the cocoon. It's, doing that whole thing.
Yeah.
We'll have to have a dance party later. But if you help that.
After Gen Z parties later. After Gen Z parties later.
You can DJ it. Inside joke, sorry guys. But if you help that caterpillar, that butterfly is trying to get out of the cocoon, you actually weaken its wings and it can't fly when it gets out. So what we find with Gen Z is that if we do too much for them when they're working their way through that youth stage, developmental, that we actually lower what's called their self-efficacy, their confidence that they can handle life on their own. When they feel like they can't handle life on their own, their anxiety and depression goes way up. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about tonight, and really want to look to my friend David Galvan. He is the Director of Education for a Lifetime, and you are a mental health certified first responder.
First aid, yeah.
First aid responder. And so David has a wealth of knowledge and information and practicality that he can add to this conversation. And then what we're going to do is we're going to wrap everything up with some practical things that we can take home that we can take to the youth ministry, and that we can even take to our workplaces. So Dave, I'm gonna hand it off to you.
Well, I appreciate that. I love that I get to go after Jeff and Sarah and Megan, because they get to say a lot of smart things, and I can take all those smart things and make them common. And so that's what my role is in life, and it's to take something that can be very complex and very detailed, and then say, well, what do we do with this? Like, what do we like do with all this great knowledge now? And like, where do we go from here? And so one of the things I love about Gen Z, and it's been said over and over again, is they love to ask questions. They've been a great generation to ask questions, and they want to ask more questions. And I've heard it said this way: Gen Z doesn't need the older generation for information. They need us for interpretation. They need us to take that information and interpret that information. What does it look like? How do we interact with that? What do we do with that information? And so when you talk resiliency, most of us grew up through our life with fairly to like limited things that actually really, really affected us. And we came out of that okay, a little bit unscathed, but okay, right? If we take on the mentality of helicopter parent or slow plow or lawnmower or whatever you espouse to, Humvees, whatever you do, that at the end of the day will actually remove resiliency for our children. I love, there's a book by that I love. It's titled The Gift of Failure. The gift of failure. The gift that at the end of the day, it's okay to fail. And the story that's told in there is this middle school teacher writes this book. She says, my student that day or that night had worked on a project. They're a second grader. Now they're a second grader, worked on a project, and the project is sitting on the coffee table. That project, as it's sitting on the coffee table, mom sees son go out the door, got the lunch in the bag, the backpack, and goes all the way to the bus, and mom sees project on the coffee table, sees son go out the door, project on the coffee table, in the bus, bye mom, and literally the mom left it on the table. Then the mom has this dilemma. I'm going to the school later. I gotta go talk to the school nurse anyways. I should probably just take the project with me. And has this wrestling that some of us as parents have had before, right? I have a freshman that's going to be a freshman, and this dilemma like, do I take the project? Do I not take the project? Do I take the project? I should watch Netflix, and then I'll take the project. Like what goes on in that moment? And the parent, she said, I didn't take it. And what she said after that, she was writing the book, she said, I'd rather them learn this lesson now than when they're 18, when they're 26. And what's happened with snowplow parenting and that lawnmower parenting and helicopter parenting is we've lost resiliency, that grit that we live in that says, hey, I've got to navigate this and figure this out so that I can become that butterfly. And so what happens is we now see 1 in 5 student between the ages of 15 and 24 living with a mental health illness. Now that's diagnosed, okay? So that means there's more than that are walking around with anxiety, depression. They're walking around with bipolar, schizophrenia, whatever that looks like, and parents are ill-equipped to have those conversations. You know, we grew up in an era where, or in our city here, I should say, where we taken the sicknesses and illnesses and really have made them kind of stigmatized. And let me explain how it is. You've probably heard this if you lived in Colorado Springs anytime. You've heard, well, the weather's a little bipolar here. And in that one moment, who's ever standing around us that may be navigating bipolar, that stigma is in. Like I can't. A history of depression in close family members. Maybe you say like, man, those people are really crazy. They're like, and then all of a sudden, like learning and other school difficulties. How about this one? Recent adverse events in that person's life, such as being a victim of crime, it's death, serious illness in the family, having an accident, deal with being bullied, victimized. Well, how about this? Social media is great. I love social media. I probably posted something today. You probably posted something today. And it was pretty funny. I was going to read something in regards to, I just want to read this because you've been talking a lot about math. It says, Dear Algebra, stop talking, stop asking us to find your generation it's not coming back. And so, that would have been my response in high school. And so, I would say at the end of the day, that these students are navigating and seeing stuff on social media full-time for a person with a long-term disability. And they're seeing traumatic effects increase school shootings because of depression. They're
seeing
On the
floods,
anxiety
being
side,
burned
something
out,
for us that I
fires,
want us to consider
fights.
as we look at
They're seeing this
risk
at a-
factors for anxiety.
exacerbating level.
This
Than
is
more than any
having
other
more
generation.
sensitive
When we grew
emotional
up,
nature.
when
When you
I
look at our
grew up,
generation,
we would
they
see it in the
can talk about
newspaper the
their
next day.
emotions
I read
like
the
more than any
newspaper
other
growing up. I
generation.
loved it. My
Most of us were told don't talk
tricks
about your
and like a
emotions,
newspaper.
right?
Like,
But
you
like
can't feel
this
that, right? We grew up
generation
in a
will
era
see
where
the school
big
shooting
boys don't
happening
cry,
live
big girls don't
and
cry.
somebody recording
And
in
now,
the
like,
school.
it's okay to
I mean,
cry at
here
everything,
now.
and they're
from
like,
the phone. Oh gosh,
raw
like how do we
footage,
do this?
uncensored,
And so we could see
on
this happen
live.
And what a
one of the
traumatic
risk factors
event
again
is experiencing
when
a
something
traumatic
like that happens, it's all based on perception.
And trauma is something as
It's
a
a perceived
generation
idea of
that
what
we're
just
all
happened.
still learning.
For instance, right now,
we
we
do
like
hit this room right now, and all of us.
And
would
so
have
what
that
I encourage
perception.
people to do, especially
And all of us
to
would
Gen
feel
Z,
something different. Is
all of a sudden,
find
all
ways
those-
to be
all
equipped
those
with information
anxieties,
that's going to be
depression,
helpful. All those emotions.
There's a program
get
out there
involved
called
in youth mental
Our
health
students
first
are seeing
aid.
this on a regular basis.
It's much like
on their
CPR
Snapchat
feeds. On their
It's
social
very,
media
very
feeds.
simple. It's an 8-hour
And
training.
it's not that
it's
we
a
can
one-day
sit there and
training,
like block all
but
this
you
all
go
day
through
long.
so
They're gonna
much
see
in
something or
regards to
another.
suicide.
Their friends got a
You
phone,
talk about
right?
suicide.
Did you see
you
what
talk
happened
about
last
the
night?
traumas that
Did you
they
see
all
this?
these
And then
here's
they're
what
getting
I'll
bullied. And then all these other things are going on,
Students
and we've
believe
got a
that
generation.
suicide's a better option than
depression,
failure.
anxiety.
That is literally their choice right now.
Let me read you a couple things in regards to depression and anxiety.
I don't believe it.
And
So I'll
as
ask
you think about
students in
these
the
things,
classroom.
think about a student that you
It's
know. Like that's all I'm just going to encourage you to do. If you
Think about
couldn't,
Gen Zers
if failure's available, and then think about
What would you
man,
choose?
what are they
They're like,
experiencing?
I'm out.
What are they navigating?
I'll quit.
And I just want to get us into their minds. So risk factors
Like,
for
our generation, failure
for
wasn't
depression.
like-
That wasn't an option.
You're like,
And these are
figure
things
out
that
how
are
to do this.
factors that
Let's just
increase
figure out how to
a
do it.
person's
That's
risk
what we're
for
seeing.
depression. A history of depression and
now
close
they'll
family
choose
members.
suicide.
Adverse childhood experiences, such as lack
So
of care,
in our culture
or abuse,
here in Colorado Springs,
learning
in
and other
2016
school
and 2017, we had 30
How
deaths
about
by
this?
suicide.
Recent adverse
under the age of
events in that
19.
person's life, such as
And
being
we
a
have
victim
what
of
we
a
call
crime,
fusion. They
yeah,
have different words,
serious
as
illness in the
contagion,
family,
cluster,
having an
like,
accident,
all
being
those things are
bullied
like
or
you can catch
victimized.
suicide.
How about this?
You can't
one?
catch
Parental
suicide
separation,
or
okay?
divorce.
But you
contribute
must be able to talk
about suicide.
When we saw, I loved how you brought
And
this
one of the
in,
things that
because
if I ever get a
2005,
an individual
recession,
recession,
we
I
saw
always
people
want
in
to say,
homes,
make the
we saw
conversation about
divorce go
suicide
up,
and mental illness
and all these separations, and we see a generation now
Because
living
that's
more
where
blended
students are.
families than any other.
Here's how you
generation.
know if you're a
and this
safe place.
increases
Ask
that
them.
likelihood of
Ask
depression
students.
and anxiety. And those
I've asked
things.
students in the classroom that said,
having
your
your
mental
homes
illness,
talk about
and
suicide,
caring. This one was really
because my
interesting.
parents
caring
think
full
if I
time
talk
for a
about it,
person
we'll
with a
do it.
long-term disability.
I go, that's interesting.
That
They've
can
been
increase
asking me to
the
make your
factors
beds for a
of
long
depression.
time. On the anxiety side, something for us that I want us to consider as we look at risk factors for anxiety.
One.
This is
and
having
two,
more
I think
sensitive
they-
emotional nature.
because
you look at our
they make it
generation,
they make it awkward.
they can talk about their emotions,
And I'll say
like
this.
more than any other
Something
generation.
only as awkward as
Most of us were told, don't talk about your emotions.
You guys do
right?
stuff
Like,
at your house,
you can't
feel
feel that,
that,
right? We grew up in a era where big
had to
boys
take
don't
off
cry,
shoes,
big girls don't
socks,
cry,
and blouses,
and now like
like,
it's okay to cry at everything.
And like,
you're
oh my
gosh,
gosh,
like how do we do this? And so we can
But
see
that's
this
where we're at.
one of the risk
we
factors
can
again
do
is
the-
experiencing a
be
traumatic
equipped
event.
with the information as we talk to
And trauma is something as a
realize
generation
they're
that we're all
probably
still
navigating
learning. That I have no
We're all still
context
learning what
for.
that looks like and how it's
And
affected us.
rather than saying,
And so what I
"Well,
encourage
we
people to
need
do,
to
especially
buck
in
up,
regards to
son,"
Gen Z,
say
is
like
find
find
ways
ways
to
to
be
be equipped with
let me be a
information
safe
that's going to
place.
help you journey along the way.
There was a
And I'll leave
program
you
out
guys
there
with
called
this.
Because of
Youth
Fake
Mental
Jobs.
Health
We're
First.
not leaving them.
No,
It's
no,
much like
Sarah, but I'll leave you
this.
this.
I had a
very,
student
very
very time.
simple.
It's an 8-hour training. It's a
come to
one-day
me and
training.
say, "Hey, I'm really
But
navigating
you go
anxiety,
through so much
depression.
in
I talk to my
regards to
parents."
suicide.
And I go, what have your parents
Suicide.
said?
They're like,
Talk
oh, we got to
trauma
read more
that they've done.
scripture,
All those
pray
things.
some
Here's what I'll
more. And they're like, I really want to see a counselor. They're like, but
students
I think
believe
it's just,
that
I think it's
suicide
just
is
where you're
better
at right
option
now. It's going to be okay.
That is
And this
literally
has
the choice,
transpired for weeks.
And I was like,
And here's what I'll encourage you.
whenever we find someone
I don't
that
believe
says,
that.
I need
So I'll
help,
ask students in the
let's
class.
figure out how to get them to
It's
that.
like,
if I believe
you
you
could-
could,
if
if
signs
failures
were
available.
available,
I've been all
what would
across
you choose?
like
Tanzania, Guatemala, Nicaragua.
Nicaragua.
Here's what I'll tell you.
And I was like,
I love prayer, and I think Jesus
like
can.
in our generation, the failure wasn't,
But
but
also,
also that wasn't an option.
Jesus,
Like,
like,
let's figure out how to get through this. He says, let's just figure out how to get through
the
it.
Holy Spirit.
That's when
counselor.
resilience has been removed.
So I think it's okay.
So
to
now
see a
they'll choose
counselor.
suicide.
Like every now and then, we may need one, right? And so I
And
think
so
as
in
we
our
advocate
culture
those
here here in Colorado Springs in 2016
and say, you know
2017,
what,
we had
as
30 death by suicide,
suicide
trained
students
students
who
under
have
the
mental
age of
health
18. And we're making a whole effort here, and we have what we call diffusion. We have different words as contagion, cluster, and they're like,
We believe
all
that
those things are like,
our
you can
students,
catch
especially
suicide,
students,
and be
you
successful.
can't catch suicide.
Okay?
Employees and
But
phenomenal
you must be able to
citizens.
talk about suicide.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And one of the things that if I ever get a individual discussion about, I really want to say, make the conversation about suicide and mental illness a safe place. Because that's where our students are. And here's how you know if you're a safe place. Ask them. Ask students. I've asked students in the classroom and said, at your homes, why do you not talk about suicide? And they'll say this, because my parents think if I talk about it, we'll go do it. I go, that's interesting. They've been asking you to make your beds for a long time. One. And then two, they say, because they make it awkward. And I'll say this, something's only as awkward as you make it. You guys do stuff at your houses that's super, super awkward, okay? I've had to take off shoes and like socks at people's houses, like, this is how we walk here. And like, and I'm like, this is awkward, but I'll do whatever you guys want, right? But that's where we're at. And so if we can do anything, be equipped with the information as we talk to Gen Zers to realize they're probably navigating something that I have no context for. And rather than saying, pull up your boots and buck up, son, say, like, where are you at? And let me be a safe place to help you journey along the way. And I'll leave you guys with this because of the faith context.
You're not leaving them.
No, I'm staying right here, but I'll leave you with this. I had a student one time come to me and say, hey, I'm really navigating anxiety, depression. I've talked to my parents. And I go, what have your parents said? They're like, well, we got to read more scripture, pray some more. And they're like, I really want to see a counselor though. They're like, but I think it's just where you're at right now. It's going to be okay. And this had transpired for weeks. And here's what I'll encourage you all in. Whenever we find someone that says, I need help, let's figure out how to get them to that. I believe in prayer, and I've seen signs, wonders, miracles. I've been all across Tanzania, Guatemala, Nicaragua. Here's what I'll tell you. I love prayer, and I think Jesus can work through that. But I also believe that Jesus left us with, he says this, the Holy Spirit, the counselor. So I think it's okay to go see a counselor. Like every now and then. We may need one, right? And so I think as we advocate those individuals and put them in position and say, you know what, as adults, we're going to be trained in youth mental health first aid. And we're making a whole effort here in Colorado Springs to do that with youth pastors and youth leaders and seeing great stuff happening. We believe that this is how we can help our students, especially this Gen Z, be successful and be employees and phenomenal citizens as they grow up.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Let's give David a big round of applause. There are some very practical things that parents can do to decrease certain risks of anxiety, things like that. One, I think, is social media. So social media, there are actually engineers working in Silicon Valley, and they work to cause the social media to pull on oxytocin and dopamine. You're like, okay, those are big words. What's oxytocin and dopamine? Dopamine has the same effects on your body as crack cocaine. And when you're surfing the interwebs and the social media and you're getting the likes and things like that, it's like pop. Pop. And you get that dopamine rush. And then the dopamine rush goes away and you get sad. And you get depressed. So you go back to the social media hoping somebody's liked. So for parents, I think one of the best things they can do is limit their children's screen time to less than 2 hours a day. I think that is a huge win. If you can reduce the social media usage. Most kids are using about 5 screens at once. So if we can get it down to a screen, less than 2 hours a day, we're hashtag winning. So that's good.
That's more than winning.
That's more than winning. Oxytocin is interesting because when we set our phones down, we all struggle with this to some degree. When we set our phones down, and like 10 seconds later, we suddenly have this fear like, oh, I've got to check my phone. That release of oxytocin is the same thing that would affect somebody who was afraid they were about to be eaten by a lion. So when you have that fear, my phone, it has to be checked now, you're having the same fear of, I'm about to be eaten by a lion.
It's close. It's really close. That's why I got the watch. That was good.
I can't do the watch. It drives me crazy. I just can't do it. Some other things that we have worked on, and one of those, I've worked with a guy named Dr. Philip Nelson. He's got his PhD in psychology out of Biola University out in California. And he and I have been talking about Generation Z and what is the solution? What are some practical things that parents, ministry and businesses can do. Because one of the great things about generations is that once you understand how generations work, you can predict their behavior throughout their life stages. So today we're going to talk about, or tonight we're going to close out with talking about youth and talking about the adult stage of Generation Z, since Generation Z is entering the job market as we speak, or trying to enter the job market as we speak. So David and I are going to role play some cognitive behavioral therapy scenarios, and these are very simple things that you can incorporate into your home, your business, and your ministry. So Rachel's going to run that out to David real quick, those notes. And we never decided, am I going to be Susan or are you going to be Susan?
You're Susan.
Okay, let's
I'm the
do
parent.
it.
Here we go.
Okay. I'm not good at voices, guys. So Susan's going to have a southern accent. So.
This is going to be great. Just a little note on the workplace. You said 8% of millennials or Gen Z recently brought their parent on their first interview. So just so you know.
8%?
Yeah. They're like, that was me. We'll talk to you afterwards. Pay close attention.
Someone was like, see, Mom?
See, Mom?
I told you.
You should have stayed up.
Why do we always assume it's Mom?
Yeah. Well, that's for part 2 of this lesson. All right, here we go.
So in this scenario, we want to identify unhelpful thinking. These are thoughts that get stuck in our head and we think about them over and over. So we want to identify unhelpful thinking.
Susan, you've been, how have you felt since you've been bullied on Snapchat?
I felt a little overwhelmed and anxious this week.
What specifically about being bullied on Snapchat triggered that feeling of anxiousness?
Well, I saw on Snapchat where Megan had invited all my friends to hang out at her house. She didn't invite me because she doesn't like me, but she invited all my friends. I'm always going to be alone.
You know, Susan, what you just said is called an automatic thought. We think these thoughts because they pop in and when triggered by something hurtful, like Megan leaving you out. As you can see, your automatic thought caused you to feel and become negative.
Now we're transitioning.
Ooh. The first thing we're going to do, I thought I heard like the page turner was happening. All right. The first thing we're going to do is write down this negative automatic thought you had. Megan left you out and you saw it on Snapchat and that triggered the thought, I'll always be alone.
Yeah, that's what happened.
When you saw the Snapchat, how did you feel?
I felt sad and lonely.
Susan, can you see how that thought could affect your whole day?
I can. If I hadn't thought that thought, then I wouldn't have ended up in a bad mood.
Insane.
So, we're obviously amateur actors.
I heard one clap for us. That was awesome. That was awesome.
More than zero.
I feel better now.
So with these scenarios, we just want you to be able to walk away with, when you're talking with your Gen Z, and you said something yesterday that as young as 7 are now exhibiting anxious behavior, anxious responses.
Yeah, they're actually showing that at the age of 7, that anxiety will introduce itself. Most are seeing that, but aren't diagnosed till well later in their life with that anxiety. So they could be 27 years old, living for 20 years with that anxiety, not realizing that. The average age for depression to be diagnosed is right around the age of 32, and that's because older individuals in their 50s and 60s, as well as youngers, that average mean right now is 32 years age for someone to be diagnosed. Could you imagine though, someone living since they were 10, 12, 16, till they're 50, 56, that's 40 years of living with this unknown illness that they could live with.
Absolutely. Now, this next scenario is for the workplace. As Dr. Nelson and I worked through this, we came up with this idea that what would be great for corporations is to actually incorporate this type of therapy into their training program.
So it's going to work a lot better because you're Steve and I'm the leader.
Steve.
All right,
That's great. Here we go.
Steve, how have you felt working on Project X this week?
I felt a little overwhelmed and anxious this week, a lot like Susan with Snapchat.
Yeah. Is that your daughter? You look a lot like her.
Do we sound the same? Southern accent?
Yeah. Is there anything specific, part of that Project X that triggered you to feel this anxiousness?
Yes, I came to the part where I was about to execute the social media strategy, and it was really difficult because I remembered a time with a marketing campaign failed on a different project. I'm always going to fail.
You know, Steve, that's what I call an automatic thought. When these thoughts pop up, and when they're triggered, this is what is an automatic thought. As you can see, your automatic thought causes you to feel and become negative and behave negatively. Let's talk about your old campaign that you failed, and talk about why it failed.
Okay. We talked about it.
Coming back. The first thing we were going to do is write down the negative automatic thought you had. You worked on a previous campaign that failed, and that triggered the thought, I'm always going to fail.
Yeah, that's what happened.
And when working on that project X, and then you had that thought come up again, how did you feel?
I really felt depressed and helpless.
Steve, can you see how that thought affected your entire day?
I can like Susan, if I hadn't thought that thought, then I wouldn't have ended up in a bad mood the rest of the day and not feeling like I could work on the project.
Insane.
Insane. So guys, we're going to skip down to one last one. We really want to do this for youth groups. And I really think that, let's see.
I'll make a comment as Aaron's doing this. One thing that we see, and sometimes you're like role playing, and we're like, well, yeah, that sounds great here. One of the greatest things that we can do for anybody is to listen non-judgmentally. That's the hardest thing for us to do as parents and as leaders, because we know something and we are something, right? And so in that moment, to listen non-judgmentally to that person takes a lot of effort, because you want to give advice. And as you hear some of these things, it's not about giving advice, it's to take them and walk them through that journey of saying, what did just happen? How did that happen? Where did that come from? And how do we change your behavior going forward? And so these are things as adults and as those that lead a generation and those that lead youth, is to take the time to say, how did I hear this? What am I hearing? And what do I really want to say? And what should I not say right now? And so what we say, especially in the training, is that we want to give responses, not advice. Like, we want to give a response, not advice. Nobody wants to hear advice, right? Especially when they're hurting. They just want to hear that they're affirmed and reaffirm them during that time. And then later on find opportunities for advice or see this. And that's what this is now.
Yeah. So the last thing that we want to do is we want to talk about imagery. And I think this is fantastic for youth groups. What I'm seeing a lot come out with Gen Z as far as Christian discipleship, things like that, is just a new study guide that's coming out. It's just a new, read these scriptures, read these verses, talk about this. But I think that if we actually take our discipleship model and we just shift it a little bit, that we can help Generation Z deal with their anxiety and then not even realize that we're giving them the tools to deal with it. So I'd ask everybody, this is a little out of the blue, but I'd ask everybody, please close your eyes. Please close your eyes. I can see you, so please close your eyes.
I have no lenses in right now.
Okay, so our eyes are closed. I want you to imagine that you are on a beach. Sand in your toes. You hear the ocean coming in. Hear the roar of the waves. The sun is beating down on your skin. You can feel the warmth. you breathe in the salty ocean air. A deep breath. Everybody take a deep breath. Exhale that ocean air. You look down the beach and you see Jesus. And Jesus is walking towards you. And a woman comes up to him. And you see Jesus heal her. Okay, you can open your eyes. So what Dr. Nelson and I have worked on and recommended is that we actually make our discipleship experiential through this use of imagery. Imagery actually works very well with young people, teenagers, children. But we'd add another caveat to it. So what we would say is take your scripture that you're working with them that week and make it experiential. Have them imagine themselves in it. But the second thing that we would do is after you do that once or twice, invite your Gen Z student to participate. Have them lead the imagery. Have them contribute to it. Have them help write it. You can't go to the beach every week in small groups. So you may want to work up some different imageries, things like that. But slowly, over a year's time, without them realizing it, you're actually giving them tools that help combat their anxiety and depression. And these are time-proven tools. I mean, you teach them as well.
Yeah, this gives them an opportunity to tell what's going on behind the scenes. So the moment we all closed our eyes, and I watched, I kind of observed what was going on, but the moment Aaron even said, stand on your toes, people were like, oh, man. Some of you are great. Some of you, in the moment that he said, hot beating sun, those of you that like wear, 100-proof sunscreen, were like, please don't. Like, we all were experiencing that differently. And so students, when you give them the opportunity to share the story, and you get insight of what's actually going on for them, you'll hear the story like, this is what I'm thinking about right now. And then you'll understand kind of where their story is at, and that imagery provides an opportunity for a conversation later on.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thank you so much for being here tonight. We wanted to look at Gen Z through the lens of that question, am I safe? And I think that as you encounter those who are near you and around you that are Gen Z, you should be asking that question. How am I creating an environment that helps them feel safe, but also in a way that I can challenge them to move forward with their lives? Thank you so much for being here. We do plan on releasing an ebook in the next month or so. Yeah, an ebook.
Awesome.
And it's going to have almost everything that we talked about tonight in it, but it's also going to have strategies for implementing in your home, youth group, and in the workplace. So thank you so much for being here. There's many of you who are going to join us in the after party. That's going to be down at, that's going to be down at Rendezvous. We had to move it because of the rain, but you are more than welcome to join us. So thank you so much.